Okay, folks, welcome to episode 3 of the webinar series of this Cycling Life. We're going to get started very soon. We're just seeing people come on at the moment. I see a lot of people adding right now, coming in on the call. We've got about 30 people joining us. We have actually over 300 people registered today. So for those of you who are coming on, we will leave your video and audio muted today because of the high numbers on the call. However, we will be using the Q&A function. So if you do want to interact with us, please do use the Q&A. We're not great at multitasking, so please don't use the simultaneous chat function. Stick with the Q&A. I'm just seeing the numbers coming up still. Very good. We actually have an incredible diversity of people joining us today. We've got people coming from North America, US and Canada. We've got people from Asia, India, Malaysia, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, in the South Pacific. And of course, we have people from across Europe. We've got Belgium, the Netherlands, people from Scandinavia and the UK. So looking forward to today. So with that, I'm going to start my video and welcome my co-host to join me. My name's Jamie Anderson. I'm an author, a speaker, and of course, a cyclist. I'd like to introduce my mate, Alan Davis.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to another This Cycling Life webinar. I'm Alan Davis, currently living in the north of Spain in the Basque Country, professional bike rider and current coach and UCI technical advisor.
Over to you, Mick.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Rogers. I'm coming to you this morning from the Italian part of Switzerland. I'm working with Team NTT in the professional cycling. And in the past life, I was also a professional cyclist for 16 years.
Terrific. Okay, guys, thank you. So as those of you who know who've joined us previously on webinars, what we do here at This Cycling Life is essentially we collect your questions. And we've had questions coming into us over the past 2 weeks, and we put those questions into 3 buckets. So what we're going to do today is we're going to dip into each one of these buckets and we're going to answer those questions. So the first bucket we're going to dip into is what we call the getting there bucket. And all those questions relate to preparing, training, building up to a competition or a goal. What we're also going to be addressing is what we call the being there, which is how do you actually reach peak form? How do you stay in peak form? Topics even like tapering, resting up before a race. And then the third bucket that we're going to be dipping into is what we call the happily ever after. And what this one is all about is essentially everything else besides what you do with your body. So this can be tactics, it can be managing relationships, mental health. So let's reach into the first bucket. And with that, Mick, why don't you read this question out for us from Kathy in Canada?
Thank you, Jamie. Again, Kathy from Canada. I'm really enjoying Professor ALBY's tactical tips about sprinting. Can the professor give me some training tips to improve my sprint, both on the bike and in the gym? What about Jamie's pyrotechnics? I presume she means plyometrics, right?
Look, Mick, I actually looked this up in the dictionary, and Kathy, pyrotechnics is a firecracker. So what we're going to be talking about is plyometrics. Are you ready for us, Professor ALBY?
I am, everyone. Thank you, Kathy, for this great question. I'm sure this relates to a lot of us. As in previous webinars, I've spoken a little bit about this before, so feel free to check that out as well. First of all, if you haven't introduced these techniques into your training, this will give you great benefit. First of all, the gym training. We use a lot of gym in the first phase in our preparation. And also, don't be afraid to use sprint-orientated exercises to improve your sprinting abilities. Don't be afraid to lift the weights, lower the reps, and also use some plyometrics, some jumps. We've also touched base on this in previous episodes. Check it out and you'll gain some huge benefits from this training.
Yeah, we've also had a few people reach out to us just in the last couple of weeks since we talked about plyometrics, some people buying themselves plyometrics boxes for home, which, during the current COVID-19 situation and lockdowns, plyometrics are actually some great exercises that you can do at home. I have a plyometrics box right here in the living room next to my indoor trainer. ALBY, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the specific sprint trainings on the bike, seated efforts, for example?
Yeah, seated efforts we can see here in my number 3 tip. It's an explosive sprint session that I coach my athletes. It's basically it's an effort that I used to do personally on an indoor trainer, but you can also do this outside. It's completely transferring the gym training basically onto the bike. So it's essentially a gym session on the bike. So you want to, get in your race position, down in the drops, get down to a standstill position. I mean, on an indoor trainer, you can do this. Outdoors, it's a little bit more trickier. And then, go down to a big gear that you'll feel comfortable with and just do a 15-second explosive 15-second sprint, and then have a good rest. And please do this at the start of your ride. We found a lot of benefits. When you're nice and fresh, your glycogen stores are full. You'll get a lot more benefit from doing these sessions.
Yeah. And Professor, tell us a little bit about the high-speed simulated sprints.
Actually, before we move on to that, Mick, just a couple of points on the last two, because of course, this is something that, Professor ALBY has brought into my training, both the explosive, standing start, but also the seated sprints. And what I find as well is it's a very natural progression on from the gym, because when Professor ALBY sets me my gym routine, which is about 6-7, leg exercises plus a couple of plyometric exercises, which actually, by the way, we're going to share with all you in the webinar notes. We're actually going to provide you the detailed gym session with all of the different exercises that we do. Most of those exercises actually you do within about 12 to 15 seconds. So you're doing that in the gym in that sort of 10, 15-second effort, 8 to 12 reps, and then you're pretty much moving that onto the bike as well. So for me, I felt it's a pretty natural kind of progression. The other thing, Professor ALBY, you mentioned is actually the physical positioning, because one of the things you had me working on was getting very low over the front of my bike. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, during your gym training and also throughout the season, I really advise my athletes to do a lot of core strength ability training as well. Yeah. What this does is when you're, especially for sprinting, you get in that position and on race day and in training, you're really locking your core muscles to get all the power through to your pedals, right? Through your pedals. Apart from that, this can always be, it always helps you getting more aero in your position while sprinting as well. So you'll see the huge sprinters nowadays getting really low in the front of their position. Apart from gaining huge strengths muscularly, they're getting a lot more aero than previously and going a lot faster.
Yeah, and I think Mick, you, as a TT rider, the aerodynamics are significant, right? Can you mention that? The difference between a more upright position and simply getting low like that?
Absolutely. The faster you go, Jamie, the more the aerodynamics has an influence on your speed. To go from 30 kilometers an hour to 40 kilometers an hour needs energy, but to go from, let's say, 50 to 60, it in essence requires 4 times the amount of power. So very, very important.
Yeah. So what we'll also perhaps do, in future episodes, we'll also talk about some of the very practicalities of aerodynamics. For example, for me, when I'm getting into those events where I really know that it's very likely it's going to enter in a sprint, the aero helmet, the skin suit, aero suit, all of that comes in as well. But we'll talk about that on another episode. Professor ALBY, can you talk to us a little bit about the high speed stuff that Mick was alluding to earlier?
Yeah, these sprint sessions are basically really race simulated. Myself personally, I used to have a motorbike, so I'd launch my sprints off the back of a motorbike. You can also do this off another rider to lead you out, or even if you don't have options of that, you can also do this after a descent where you don't really have to pedal too much, and you can really roll onto a flat bit of road at a high speed, and then you do a sprint, starting from a high speed. And if you haven't got this in your training today and you introduce it, your sprinting ability will improve immensely.
Yeah. And what's the idea behind that, ALBY? If you can just dig in a little bit, sprinting at high speed, you're almost replicating that speed of what would actually be in the races. Is that correct?
Exactly. And, become race day, it's amazing how clear and how much, benefits you get from practicing this simulated effort just comes spontaneously, and don't be afraid to give a headbutt or a bit of a nudge to your lead out rider on the way past, just to make it a lot more realistic. But the proof's in the pudding. I did this
Yeah,
my whole career. I'm doing this with my athletes.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, Alby, you know, when I came up to visit you in the Basque Country and you took me out on the motorbike, it's hard to describe to the amateur athletes or masters out there, but when you're in a race, you know, like, for example, the Cape Town Cycle Classic, which has a big, long straight run into the finish. I mean, I'm hitting speeds there of 62, 65 kilometers an hour. That freaks you out a little bit if you're not used to it, that kind of speed. And like you said, not just physically being in that kind of speed, because you do get nerves. You have to manage yourself. I've been in so many situations with master cyclists who are not experienced at that kind of speed and reaction, and there are a lot of crashes late in the races in grand fondos and these kind of events. So it also prepares, I think, you a little bit mentally for that fast reaction speed. Would you agree with that, Alby? That's also sort of helpful?
Completely agree. The more times you practice this in training and in races, the more calmer you will be, you know, the more relaxed you will be, and you'll spontaneously react to different situations that unfold on race day easier. I mean, even the seated explosive sprint sessions, these really help those last kilometers leading into a sprint as well, where you're predominantly in the seat in race position, just surfing the peloton, you know, trying to find a good position. These, you know, that box is ticked, and you have really a lot of benefits gained there.
Now, of course, when we first started working together, Professor Alby, I didn't have a motorbike. I didn't have a guy to lead me out. I used to come, you know, to you in the Basque Country and get behind your bike. However, 2 months ago, I bought a 700-watt electric e-bike for the family. And it's fabulous. So now I actually go out training with my 13-year-old son, Charlie. Yeah. And this bike, don't tell anybody, okay? It's a little bit pimped. It does almost 50 kilometers per hour. And it's fantastic. So not only do I get some quality father and son time with my little boy, I can actually practice the headbutting and the shouldering that you've talked about as I go past him on the road. Toughens him up and gives me great training practice. So I highly recommend that for all the mums and dads out there.
Yeah, you're a great, I mean, you've got 3 home trainers in the living room. You've got, you're buying all these bikes and having your children
headbutting your son,
headbutting your children.
No, it's not about work cycling balance. It's about work cycling integration. You know, life cycling integration. You shouldn't try to get these things in balance. You should integrate them all together. That's my advice to you.
I've got some stuff to learn from you, Jamie. So.
Listen, Padawan, you stick around with me, mate. You'll go far. All right. Hey, Alby, why don't you talk to the last one about having goals and, you know, sort of matching the goals to your abilities?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good one as well. You know, after you've ticked all the boxes before what I've spoken about, I mean, as professionals, we didn't have a choice to choose our races. So we were thrown in a lot of different races. Our audience is predominantly masters competing athletes or amateur competing athletes. You have the option to choose your events and your goals. So don't be afraid to choose realistic goals where it suits your fortes. You know, if it's a sprinting ability, choose sprinting orientated events.
Yeah, very good. Okay, excellent. Thanks a lot. Now, as we said, we would like this to be interactive. So if any of those questions are coming to mind for you about how you actually can convince your partner, for example, to get a 700-watt e-bike in the garage for your 12-year-old child to ride, just post those questions in the chat box, no problem. So why don't we move on, actually, because what we want to get into now is actually question number 2. And actually, we have a question here coming in from a guy called Daryl in South Africa. And what Daryl has asked us is this. He says, I'm not the lightest guy. Every year I race the Cape Town Cycle Classic. It's also known as the Cape Argus, usually with the top-seeded amateurs group. So what Daryl's explaining is when they do the Cape Argus, it's a massive event with thousands of people. They have the pros go off first, and then the second group is what is called the top-seeded amateurs, the 1A race group. I've raced with that group. Alan has raced with the pros. In fact, Alan has won for the pros. I've won for the amateurs. So we love this race. What Daryl's problem is, however, though, Mick, is that he tends to get dropped on the last climb of the race. And that climb is a famous climb called SUIKERBOSSIE, which is right here. So Mick, do you want to talk to us a little bit about the profile of this climb and then respond to Daryl for us?
Sure. I mean, just before I talk about the profile, I mean, Daryl from South Africa, I'm thinking it's Daryl Impey, right?
Do you reckon?
has to be. I mean,
he said he's an amateur, but he could actually be kind of, you know, he might have been a bit shy about saying it was him.
Of course. Daryl, this course profile, all about position. You know, a final climb is always about position. You want to be in that top 5, maximum 10 riders, because you have a much better view of what's happening in the race. You have literally a clean road in front of you. You don't have people coming back, drifting all over the place and swerving side to side, which results in less accelerations for you. So position is very, very important. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Mick, I mean, that's sometimes easier said than done, right? I mean, Alan and I have both done this race, and you know, you actually come off a relatively flat sort of plateau. You have a big roundabout, then you go left and then right up onto the climb. So, you know, how far before that climb should you be moving your way to the front? You know, because in the Cape Town Cycle Classic, in the pelotons I've been in, sometimes at this stage in the race, you've already been over a climb called Chapman's Peak, but there might still be 80 or 100 people in the peloton at this stage.
Well, I mean, it needs to be a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it's easy to stay up the front because it's a very thin road. When it's a very large road, you know, you have a lot of room on the road to be able to jump up at the last second.
Yeah.
So you really have to look at the course. You have to look where the wind's coming from. I mean, one of the suggestions, if there's any flags leading into the climb or there's a lot of trees, you can just briefly look up and see where the wind's coming from. That's going to give you more information of when you should move up or on what side of the bunch you can move up. Of course, the later the better, but it's also, you have to keep in mind there's a lot of variables that go into that calculation.
Yeah, okay. And you know, one thing that, you know, that happens then, of course, if you hit the climb at the front, then we talk about pro cycling speak, you talk about the drift. Can you tell us what that actually means, the drift?
Absolutely. So the drift refers to literally starting at the front of the group at the climb and then using the length of the group to slow your speed right down. So in a perfect world, you want to be cresting the top of the climb in the last position of the group.
Yeah.
So in a real race, the guys from the back accelerating, trying to get to the front, you're doing the absolute opposite. You're going from the front and going backwards. So you can conserve that little bit of energy. Yep. Of course, please be careful with this one because gaps can open up that you need to bridge across. But use this to your advantage as much. Start at the front, have a look around, and then slowly drift back. So when you are cresting the climb, there you are. You're still on the back of the front guys and ready to roll.
I mean, Alan Davis, you were a renowned sprinter who could, you know, get yourself over those hills to come to those small group finishes. So what did you learn along, you know, the many years of your career about the drift?
I mean, excellent advice from Mick there. You know, also you, Jamie, you've done it yourself, which saves a lot of energy. I mean, I made a career of doing this drifting practice. So basically you want to do your research. Like Mick said, you know, do your research on the climb. You know, if it's a nice straight road, also not only climb, do your research on the descent after the climb, because that's where you're going to make the positions up after you've drifted back. So if it's a nice straight road, for example, descent, you know, you've got a big access to, you know, a nice straight road, big road to get back to the front. So really take into account the research of the course.
Yep.
And on the opposite side of that, if it's a technical descent, you may not have to drift so far back. You know, you may have to stay closer to the front, also saving energy by drifting, but knowing you're going to be on the front after the descent if it breaks on the descent. So some good
and this is certainly, I think all this advice is absolutely valid for the climb that Daryl is talking about, because SUIKERBOSSIE, it's essentially a straight road. It's a straight uphill, 2.8 kilometer drag, 6%, a few little ramps along the way. But you know, what I experienced in racing it was all of these tactics are 100% valid, because it's relatively easy to get to the front of the bunch on the run in because of the plateau. When you're on the climb at the front, you have that big wide road. And as you hit the climb, actually, in the Cape Town Cycle Classic, there are flags beside the road at the bottom. So you can even see which direction the wind is coming. So luckily, actually, it was interesting getting this question from Daryl, because when I last did the race, actually one of the previous races I did in 2016, I had a video camera on my bike, and I actually still have the recording of doing the drift on SUIKERBOSSIE. So what we're going to do after this webinar is we're actually going to share you a YouTube link to that video where you will actually see exactly what I do in following these tactics that Professor ALBY briefed me on. I start in 5th position, but by the time I get to the top of the SUIKERBOSSIE, I'm about 50 riders back. And I'll talk a little bit about the wattages I put out to do that compared to some of the other guys. Mick, can you maybe talk to us about changing pace? Because that's something I also did on SUIKERBOSSIE when I did it in 2016.
Sure. And just actually, I just wanted to add just one last thing to what Alan was saying there. And Jamie is when you are drifting, have a look at just keep an eye on the speed, because some of these faster climbs and very nice roads are not so steep. Any speed over 16, 17 kilometers an hour, remember there still is a drafting effect.
Yeah.
When you start to get onto really, really steep climbs, you know, the 10%, when the speed goes under 16, 15 kilometers an hour, that draft effect or the slipstream effect has a very, very small benefit.
Yeah.
But absolutely changing pace, just to answer your question there. Changing pace happens always in racing. You know, when you're climbing, whether you're doing, particularly mainland Europe, you're doing the 180-degree hairpin turns, there's a rider coming back in front of it, you might need to accelerate around. You need to be able to change pace when you're climbing. And again, coming back to my saying, if it isn't happening in training, it's not happening in racing. So start to integrate some changes of pace when you are doing your climbs in training sessions. You know, they could be short accelerations, 5 seconds, just whoop, lift the speed up a little bit, slow down.
Yeah.
Lift the speed up, just do some variations in pace.
Yep. And why is that physiologically, Mick? I mean, because I know, for me, sometimes when I'm particularly on a long climb, clearly, it's high cadence, you're really using your aerobic system. And then you sometimes feel like you're really getting into the red. So one of the techniques Professor ALBY sort of introduced to me actually was to also sometimes switch to a sort of muscular power. Give your aerobic system a little bit of a rest by switching a little bit to that sort of anaerobic glycogen system, but not overdoing it. I don't know. I mean, Mick, you've probably done much more research on this than we have. What is that about?
Ideally, what you're trying to do is particularly on a long climb, is you're trying to, to stop massive amounts of lactate from building up, right?
Yeah.
But an important part of that is to be able to buffer that lactate. So when you do have an acceleration in the race, you need to, pop the speed up a couple of kilometers now, maybe get out the seat.
Yeah.
And then sit down. You want your body to be able to flush that lactate as quick as possible. And those changes of rhythm are going to be beneficial to that, to training that system.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, Nick, I can just follow up a little bit on this. I mean, throughout my career, you were the one who gave me this advice that I integrate into my training these days with my athletes, including you, Jamie, was 40-20s, for example. Do you want to climb doing 40-20s? Do you want to speak a little bit more about, explain what a 40-20 effort is?
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite a well-known training session in cycling now is 40 on. Is the intense element. So 40 seconds at a high speed, and then 20 seconds, you almost come to a standstill, not a standstill, but you're literally easiest gear you have and just turning over the legs. And we repeat that 40, 20, 10 times. So it's a 10-minute effort in total with 10 variations. And that's a very, very good exercise to facilitate that change of rhythm.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Super important. And of course, the technical term for this that many people use is micro intervals. And it can be, I use 30 on, 15 off. Sometimes I use 40-20. But if you look at the guys now who are doing really well, you look at the Van der Poels, you look at the Van Aerts, they've come from cyclocross where micro interval kind of training has been the norm for decades. And we're seeing more of that coming into road racing now. The interesting thing for me, Mick, actually was doing those micro intervals. What I would see is that 10-minute normalized power was sometimes higher than when I was just trying to hold a steady state pace. And in terms of the figures for people, what we're talking about here, Mick said going fast, but actually typically the micro interval, you're doing it at something like 1.2 to 1.4 times your FTP. right? So for me, that's somewhere around 390, 410 watts, something like that for that 30-second on. And then it's really easy for that 15 seconds off. So you're also acclimatizing your body to those much higher wattages, which on the climb can take you a long way. So sorry for getting too technical, folks, but we hope that's useful. Mick, I mean, look at the guy on the right here in this photograph. I mean, you seem to be hurting a little bit here, but he looks pretty comfortable. Can you tell us a little bit about this climb, and then let's talk about the descending?
Well, it's funny. That photo is from the 2013 Tour de France with Saxo Bank, and I think we were chasing Chris Froome at that time.
Yeah.
You know, I've got the hurt mask on. Alberto, he's not really looking too comfortable. You know,
he looks pretty good to me, Mick.
No, I disagree. I have to respectfully disagree with you there, Jamie. But exactly. I just want to touch a little bit upon cadence as well. You know, the tendency is on long climbs or even shorter climbs is kind of really grind, you know, get that cadence low, you know, high 60s, mid 70s. What you really want to be doing is trying to keep that cadence up between, you know, the 80s and 85s. I mean, the pros, they're going to be doing 85 towards 90.
Yeah.
Keeping that cadence up just that little bit. Think about it in this way. If you need to lift 100 kilos, would you do that in one lift, or is it easier to do it in 10 lifts of 10 kilos?
Yeah.
So you have to distribute that weight out over, you know, more lifts as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mick, there was a question coming in there as well from Michelle Ferris, asking about how many sets in a session for the 40-20s?
I think you want to build into it. So you maybe want to start with 5 if it's a particular interval that hasn't been done before. But over time, you could quite easily build up to 2 sets of 10.
Yeah. So that's similar. I mean, for us, you know, with ALBY, with the work we've been doing, I would typically do 2 sets of the 40-20s, and for the 30-15s, you know, when I'm getting into really good form, then it might be 3 sets of 10 minutes, each of those with the 30-15, something like 13 efforts. Something like that throughout. Can you talk to us a little bit about descending, guys? Because, you know, both of you were great descenders. So ALBY, how about you? I mean, any tips and tricks for once you get over that peak? What about the descent?
Yeah, this is a really unlooked at part of cycling, I feel. And if you can practice it and become an expert at it, you can gain huge benefits from. So the first thing I got taught actually was to be a better descender was to always look further forward than what you normally do, you know. Always keep your eye always really high on the descents, and automatically, you know, your brain will find the perfect line to hit the apex of the corners, you know. So you really want to keep looking as high and as further forward as you can as you're descending, and automatically your brain will find the fastest access points through the corners.
I'm going to piggyback on you there, ALBY. I'm going to piggyback on you because that's one of a lot of people ask me, you know, how do you know going into that corner what that corner is going to be like? You know, what's around the corner that you don't know? But if you really think about it, and this is a real pro tip, that if you observe the body language of the person in front of you, you can see their lean. You can see are they braking hard? Are they relaxed? Are they tense? You can understand a lot about the corner that's coming up just by that person's body language. And in the pros, I mean, well, when I was pro, when you were pro, ALBY, particularly in France, we always had the police motorbike that would sit 20, 30 meters in front of the group. And we could just tell by the body language, the lean of the motorbike, how aggressive the corner was going to be. So it's almost having a radio in your ear telling you, you know, how sharp the corner is and what the characteristics are.
If I can relate that to the amateur racing that, you know, many of our audience are doing. So I use a couple of tactics. The first one, of course, is I use my Garmin. I download the route onto my Garmin, and then I set the map to about 200 to 300 meters. What do you call it? Magnification. Sorry. So, you know, in some races like the UCI Gran Fondo Tour of Cyprus, there's some really technical descents there, very narrow roads. I don't always get a chance to ride those roads ahead of the race. However, when I have my navigation and I can see exactly what's coming 200 meters in front of me, that can be a huge advantage. I've dropped guys on climbs using purely my Garmin. Of course, I'm hoping it's accurate, and usually it is. The other thing that I do is a little trick. Last year at the European Masters Games in Torino, on the start line, I was just chatting to people. And what am I trying to find out? Who are the locals? So anyone who looked Italian, I was saying, oh, where are you guys from? Where are you guys from? I've met 3 guys who were local to Torino. So what did I do? On those descents, I stuck with those guys because I knew that they would know these climbs, which they absolutely did. And I didn't get dropped on descents where many other riders who were not from the region got dropped because of that technicality. So, you know, I hope that makes sense, and some little tips and tricks that can definitely work. When it comes to SUIKERBOSSIE, which is the climb that Daryl was asking us about, I think both Alan and I, we had the same experience. We drifted on SUIKERBOSSIE. We went from the first 5 people to 50 or 60 riders back. But if you watch my video from the Cape Town Cycle Classic in 2016, what you will see is that 5 kilometers later, I was back at the front again. And I did that climb, SUIKERBOSSIE, with a normalized power of around 300 watts, 310. I looked at Strava just after I got this question. Many of my competitors did that climb at 350 or 360 watts.
Yeah, and that's a lot. That's 10%. I mean, that's probably 10% difference, right?
Right. And the difference there, Mick, as you know, ALBY and I talk about, right? What have they done? They've burnt those glycogen stores that they need for the sprint or the last kilometers of the race, and
Exactly.
that can make all the difference.
Exactly, Jamie. To give it a little bit of a bit more insight, it's like what I was taught many years ago. It's like going into war with you've got 6 bullets.
Yeah.
So you want to save as many bullets as you can to use your bullets effectively, right? So you and yourself, by doing that, you saved a bullet. Yeah. And you could use that bullet again later on when it came to the sprint, and you actually won the race because you had more bullets saved up. So that's just to put a little bit of an example out there to make it easier. So save your bullets, guys, and use them effectively.
Yeah, good. Okay, great. So why don't we move on to our next question? And please do keep those questions coming. We had a wonderful question actually from Sean Rolls. Actually, Sean was the person who won the record from last time. He won the Eddie Merckx, the Bravo Eddie album, because he's been awesome. Sean is actually one of our greatest promoters on This Cycling Life. You know, sharing our stuff on social media, promoting us with all of his pals. So we've shared that with him. But his question actually, Professor ALBY, was where can he buy a banana suit for the sprint? And we're not going to answer that. But for people who were not on the previous webinar, we had a photo of Alan winning the Commonwealth Games in a bright yellow skin suit. We don't want to go there, Alan, I think. Let's move on to the next question. Alan, can you maybe read this one for us?
Yeah, we had a question here. I'm a 40-year-old cyclist living in Lombardy. So that's in the north of Italy there, guys.
Alan, you have to say that's for the American people on the call because they might actually think Lombardy is a country.
We have a strict lockdown conditions at the moment, and I find it hard to keep motivation. What do you recommend to help me be motivated now as we don't know when races will start again in Italy? From Alessandro. Mate, Jamie, you're the one who's actually competing at the moment out of our threesome. So I think you're the best one to answer this motivational question, mate.
Alan, please don't refer to us as a threesome, mate. I do love you guys, but the level of intimacy I think is going to go a little bit far if we start talking like that. All right, so just don't.
The board.
I'll second. Just maybe we'll keep that conversation offline, mate.
Come on, James.
All right, let me talk to you actually about a few things. What I will talk to Alessandro about is definitely like the COVID-19 cycling thing. But actually, I want to step back a bit. The first thing I believe right now is we just have to try to stay positive. In my other life, I work on leadership, and a big part of what I talk about with leadership is just having a positive outlook and positive attitude. So one of the ways we can actually help with our motivation is just to remember to smile. What you see us doing here on This Cycling Life is we smile and we laugh a lot. Now, why is that? Because the research shows that even in situations of stress and crisis, people who smile and who laugh, they tend to experience stress and anxiety a little bit less. So that helps actually you stay just positive and motivated. The other little piece of general advice that I can give Alessandro here is a little hack you can use is on a day-by-day basis, if you're feeling a bit down in the dumps, you're feeling a bit sort of depressed, keep what's called a gratitude diary. So when I wake up my kids in the morning, I always say to them, you know, Reese, Hannah, Charlie, I say, wake up, smile, and let's be grateful for what the world has brought to us. And I ask them, what are you grateful for today? And the research on this one also shows that if you can think on a day-to-day basis, especially write it down, what you're grateful for, that will genuinely increase your mood and motivation. So that's on the general stuff. Then it comes to the specific, you know, sort of cycling related stuff. And here, I think what's super important is kind of the why. And when I met Alan and started working with Alan as a coach, it was very interesting because he asked me this question: why do you ride your bike, Jamie? And no one had asked me that before. Do you remember that, Alan?
Yeah. I mean, that's to add a little bit more, I think it's setting little micro goals, you know, and that gives you a why. That gives you a why in life. You even set daily goals, micro goals, you know, it makes you feel better by accomplishing goals. It gives you control on your future and the why you're doing something.
Yeah. So that for us is always super important. So for us, there's two kind of whys. Why, of course, is for me as an athlete, I want to reach my potential, right? And that's a big motivator. So the research on this is also interesting. The research shows, the psychological research, is that if you set stretching goals for yourself, your body actually releases dopamine, right? And a chemical called neuroadrenaline. And what that's related to is that if your brain knows that something big is coming, it's kind of like that fight or flight mechanism, but not in a negative way in terms of the cortisol, for example, that can be triggered when you're afraid. This excitement factor releases dopamine and noradrenaline. And what that is associated with actually is feelings of positivity, drive, and motivation, right? So these goals become super important. And Alan, maybe you can talk a little bit about not just the short term, but also the long term, because that for me right now is super important because the short term goals are difficult. Long term, we have the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the other benefit we have as masters competing athletes or amateur competing athletes. You know, we can set goals from 5 years from now, you know, there's no time frame. So that's another thing to come back on through this period we're living with the COVID-19, the uncertainty, we don't know what's going on. So that's another reason to have longer term goals, the macro goals, you know, and turn to them to find more clarity with the situation at hand.
Yeah. So to give a very practical example of that, and I'd like to get your input too, Mick. So what Alan and I did, you know, is I was really in terrific form in April because that's what we were building up for, and then no racing. So we know there's a lot of uncertainty. So what we essentially have done now is push the reset button. So actually our next real big goal will be the World Masters Track Championships in Manchester, which is about 6 months away. Now, we're hoping that's going to happen. There's a high likelihood that will happen. However, what that now allows us to do is push the reset button. So I'm super motivated now because I see that goal's 6 months away. So actually what we're doing now is going back to the base, the build, the gym, the plyometric stuff, just as we would have done 6 months ago, building into this road season. That's motivating me. But equally, what we've also done there is set some of these sort of short and medium term goals. And what they're more around is chasing some comms, you know, in my local area, setting some sort of targets for my, 5 minute, 10 minute FTP kind of stuff. And again, what that's doing by having these goals is triggering that dopamine, that neuroadrenaline into my system because it's keeping me enthused about what's going on. Mick, in your experience and what you're doing with the guys at NTT now, how are you helping them to stay motivated?
Oh, sure. I mean, just before I jump into that, I mean, Alessandro, I'd like to say that you're not the only one, with this current problem. There's many cyclists in the world, a lot of uncertainty, not only cycling, many parts and walks of life are uncertain at the moment. So if you are feeling unmotivated, don't be scared to take a few days off.
Yeah.
Take a week off. In the big picture, it's not going to matter. Yeah. And I can almost bet that it'll be beneficial to take 3, 4, 5, 6 days off. It's not going to do anything in the big picture, nothing at all. You'll probably get a benefit.
Yep.
So, and we're doing that a lot with the pro guys as well. You know, there've been a lot of them, particular guys in France, in Spain, in Italy. They've been in their homes on a home trainer for the last 6 weeks, and that's tough mentally. So, as a consequence, your body sends you a message saying, "I don't want to do this anymore. I need a break." My advice is just to take a few easy days. You know, go do something that you enjoy. Go for a walk. Go for, you know, do some other things. It doesn't always have to be cycling. Keep your mind fresh and be ready for when you do have your goals. You want mental freshness, so you are able to flick that switch and be focused and concentrated when it really counts.
Very important, Mick. Great advice. And related, sorry, Albie, were you going to say something there?
No, I was just about to say fantastic advice, Mick. That's exactly, you know, what Jamie and I have done as well to keep mental freshness as well. So when it's time to hit the button, when we do get clarity on the events, we're ready to go, you know, we're not fatigued or mentally fatigued. And don't be afraid to use a break as a micro goal. You know, my goal is to have a break. Don't be afraid to use that. And when you accomplish that, you'll feel happier.
Absolutely. And we had a comment coming in from Martin Koop saying, you know, he's just sort of making it part of his routine, you know, waking up early in the morning, doing 45 minutes on the indoor trainer, just as part of the daily routine, because he can actually, he's not commuting, he's not working from home. So that's something that I'm doing as well, because as we said, you know, I'm going into this sort of recuperation and then heading into a rebuild phase. So I'm just enjoying getting up in the morning, doing an easy hour, really easy, watching some Netflix, doing a bit of stuff. And that's also important. The other thing, of course, Mick, is if people do need to do that long kind of training, we've talked in previous episodes of This Cycling Life about breaking it up into bite-sized pieces, not doing 3 or 4 hours on the indoor trainer in one stretch, which can be mind-deadening. Break it up into 3 one-hour sessions throughout the day. That's what I often do over the winter. Great help. You know, of course, we've got our podcast. We've talked about Netflix. We've talked about Zwift. Whatever makes you happy, do it, but don't be afraid to break it up. We've talked about the benefits for that. The last thing that I would like to add here is just how much it helps me having a coach, you know, because when I look at my training peaks and Alan is putting my training sessions in there, I know that he knows that I know if I'm not motivated, you know, because he sees that I skip. So actually having someone to encourage you, support, because it's not, you know, for me, I want to see it green, because in training peaks, if you skip the session, it's red. You know, if you've only done it halfway, it's orange. If you've nailed it, it's green. So having that external input for me also very motivating, but also not just the online interaction. I talk to Alan by phone. You know, if I'm feeling down, I'm not feeling good, I give him a call, he peps me up a little bit. And what this also relates, you know, very simply is hang out with other people who are motivated. You know, talk to people, encourage each other. And that's very much what we hope to do here on This Cycling Life as well. So I hope that's useful for people. What you shouldn't forget, absolutely what I started with, which is don't forget your why. You know, so for me, part of my why I ride on my bike is I love riding my bike, but equally I love inspiring, you know, all of those cycling lifers out there. So I'm a dad. I like being a role model to my kids and showing them the passion and the energy that I put into my sport. So I think sometimes we get caught up in our own little bubble with our cycling. So don't forget also that you can, you know, you can inspire other people. There can be a bigger why for what you do than simply riding alone and getting your own results. Alan, I don't know. I mean, I know you get a huge amount of satisfaction out of helping other people as well. And that's a motivator also for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going back to what you're saying, Jay. I mean, doing this Cycling Life webinar and this concept is part of my big why at the moment as well. You know, my routine, I'm not a competing cyclist. Going back to the question in our webinar was, I have a routine. My routine is spreading the word about the knowledge we have through our concept, This Cycling Life, right? And also at the end of the day, before dinner, I get on my watt bike and I do a session. You know, I get on Swift and it makes my day complete. I feel happier after I've done all of this. And it's just free information and advice that can really help, not only through this period, but moving forward in life in general.
Yeah, that's great, Albie. You know, spread the love, mate. Just don't use the threesome term again. All right. Okay, good. Look, guys, we are drawing to a close. There were some questions coming in about, you know, will the recording be available afterwards to share with people? Absolutely. We'll talk about that in a second. What we would like to do, of course, is to give a huge thanks. Mitch Docker is one of our partners. He gives us input on content and getting the word out there. If you haven't seen his podcast series, Life in the Pelo, please do go and have a look at it. He did a great interview recently with Adam Hansen. He's talks with guys like Luke Durbridge. So please do go over and support Mitch. Also, I was on the phone this morning with my mate Lionel Burney. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Cycling Podcast. Awesome series. I mean, the work that these guys do is really, really great. They've actually got a huge event kicking off on Saturday. It's called our Giro, and together with their partner, what you're going to be able to do actually is ride every single day of the Giro in a virtual world. The platform actually is free and will be free until the end of the coronavirus crisis. So, you know, if you need some motivation, if you need some of the stuff we've been talking about, please go over and have a look at thecyclingpodcast.com, and you'll find all the information for our Giro and how to sign up for that on their website. So
Jamie, if I can just jump in there.
Yes.
The digital platform, RGT, Road Grand Tours. I know the developer there, Alex Servan, his team, great bunch of people. They've got a really, really cool platform. We can see some of the virtual world there. Super realistic. Also an alternative, you know, to the Swifts, to the Be Cools. Check it out. It's free.
Cool. Yeah, check it out. There was a couple more questions coming in. There was a question asking, how can I reach out to Alan Davis? You've got all of our contact information there with our LinkedIn and our Twitter and stuff like that. You can direct message us. You can reach out to us. We are all busy, but what we try to do is answer you within sort of 48 hours of hearing from you. We try to commit to that to everyone. So, you know, just to close, please do go and have a look at our YouTube channel. We've got more than 20 videos up there now. We've got interviews with Matt White, Doug Ryder, Magnus Backstead. We've got 5-minute clips on how to adjust the cleats on your shoes, thanks to Professor ALBY. Lots of content there now. And also on our website, we've now got the blog. We welcome from you our This Cycling Lifers guest blog. So if you want to write something, you want to publish something in our blog, just reach out to us, because we're a platform. We're not about closed shop or, you know, exclusivity. We really want to engage you with the dialogue. So if you want to write something for our blog, we've already had guest contributions, great stuff. Please do that. Hey, Mick, why don't you do the close bit about you're getting good at this, mate.
Oh, I'm a seasoned expert at this. Friday, fireside chat with Professor ALBY. We're looking for 5 people, correct, Jamie? 5?
Yeah, 5 would be good.
Yep. What is the process there?
Nick, you're going to rehearse this, mate. Okay, so on Friday, we're doing the fireside chat with Professor ALBY. 5 people are invited. So what we're going to do is we're going to send you an email after this webinar, and you will then get the link to register for that. Okay, so we kind of draw your names out of a hat. 5 people on the fireside chat. Okay. All right, Mick, now remember this one.
Hang on, guys. I just want to butt in there. Just to,
go ahead.
We close up. As we're spreading the love today, as you said, Jay, I just personally like to thank, you know, everyone, our personal contacts and colleagues for spreading this cycling life concept. And, you know, it's been really much appreciated from not only me, from Jay and Mick as well. You know, we know we've been asking a lot, but thank you very much.
And that's, I mean, super important there. Sorry, Mick, can I just, because, you know, we've mentioned people like Lionel Burney and Mitch Docker, but actually Sean Rolls, I mean, just all of you out there, it's just awesome what you're doing. So actually, guess what? We've got 3 more copies of Eddie. So what we're going to be doing over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be, the 3 of us, we're going to be voting for the fan of the month. All right. So who is that This Cycling Lifer who's really, you know, talking about us, engaging with us, you know, talking and whether it's sending a blog post or promoting us on social media, we're going to be looking out for you, and that's going to go to you. Mick, sorry, you wanted to close the show?
Yes. I would like to say, if there is someone you'd like us to interview, please reach out. I mean, ALBY, who have we got coming up next? Who are we currently talking to?
Yeah, we've got some big names, actually. I don't want to spoil it, but I think I really have, you know, people don't know that I was a sports director, head sports director, Wiggle High Five, women's professional cycling team. So first off, came off the rank, we have Kirsten Wild, one of the best track cyclists and road women sprinters that I've ever known. So that's first cab off the rank, mate.
Great stuff. And that's a super important point, Alan, because we really do want to engage our female members of our audience, female sports people, female business people. That's going to be very much a part of what we do. So sorry, it's been a bit blokey so far, but we're really working on that. So look, I think we should draw it to a close. So please do go to our YouTube channel. If you like the videos, give us a thumbs up. Hashtag This Cycling Life in any of your social media posts. Thanks again to all of you for joining us today, and go out there, be healthy, and enjoy this cycling life. Thank you very much.
Much appreciated.